Welcome back to our companion video series for clarinet works that utilize live effects. As was stated in the first video, the purpose of this series is to help performers get started with practicing and performing these works in the repertoire, regardless of whether or not they've used live effects before in the past. This second video in the series focuses on a work of my own, titled Demo, which was completed in the summer of 2022. This work is heavily influenced by the sounds and textures from vintage video game soundtracks of the 80s and 90s. So say from your Game Boy games or the games of the NES console. And funny enough, this was written as a sort of concept work to embody my experiments over the years with using guitar effect pedals in classical clarinet performance. But over time, more and more people would reach out to me to express interest in performing the work for themselves. So I figured, why not take the time to break down my setup in terms of the gear that I'm using and the specific pedal effects that I'm using when I'm performing this work live. As it was in the previous video, all gear that's discussed here is going to be linked down in the description. Now, to reiterate a little bit of the last video in terms of just some initial equipment that you'll need, in order to perform effectively with live effects on clarinet, you're just going to need a few things. One of those things is going to be your pickup or microphone. This is going to be your means of capturing the clarinet sound and converting that into an electrical signal that can then be processed, either through guitar effect pedals or, if you prefer, a laptop or computer with live audio processing capabilities. Afterwards, that signal is then going to be sent through your chain of effects and needs to be output through some sort of amplifier and speaker combo. So a guitar amp, keyboard amp, powered PA system are all going to be things that work well for this purpose. And for me personally, as always, I'm using my piezo barrel wood model pickup paired with the Ion Total PA Max active PA system. Now, some other equipment that's worth mentioning is going to be your cabling. So the piezo barrel pickup comes with an 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch cable, where one end is going to plug into the pickup and the other end is simply going to plug into the first pedal in your signal chain. You're also going to need just a standard 1/4 inch instrument cable that's going to take you from your chain of effects into the amplifier. Now, because we're going to be working with multiple pedals in one signal chain, here's where I'm going to recommend what we call 1/4 inch patch cables. So these are just much shorter versions of 1/4 inch cables that are for convenience and for space saving. So they're just for connecting pedal to pedal, since we're going to be using about a half dozen pedals when we're performing this work. These usually come in packs of 3 or 6. And once again, because we're going to be using multiple pedals, you could power each of these pedals separately through their own power supply. But again, for convenience and for space saving, it's helpful to have a multi-output isolated power supply, a power brick, so to speak. That's going to run a clean source of power to each of your pedals simultaneously while saving on some of the bulk. So what I use is made by Walrus Audio. This is their Atos clean power supply, which has 8 separate outputs. And finally, once again, more for convenience, it's more optional than anything, is having a pedal board. So this is a really nice way to keep all of your pedals, power, and cables all in one place, so that as I'm traveling from, say, my place to a venue or traveling from venue to venue, this saves a lot of time in terms of setup and breakdown because everything's already set up in one place. So you'll notice that for something like this, there's little strips of Velcro tape, so that if I were to take the other side of said Velcro tape and attach them to the back of my pedals, all I need to do is just slap a pedal on here, and now clearly that's not going anywhere, so I can go ahead and run my cabling, hook it up to power, all that sort of stuff, so that it's easy for traveling around with my whole electroacoustic setup. And it's worth mentioning that this particular board is homemade, but I'll go ahead and leave a link down in the description for a pre-made pedal board with a carrying case, a really, really nice one made by the company Mono. So let's go ahead and go over our chain of effects itself. And the way I figure we do this is to go in signal chain order. So coming out of the clarinet and the pickup, what's going to be that first thing that the sound signal hits as it's passing through my chain of effects? And that first thing is going to be our volume pedal. For those unfamiliar, a volume pedal, such as this Boss FV30H, is going to act in a similar manner as the volume knob on an electric guitar. So when this is placed at the beginning of my signal chain, this is going to allow me to adjust and fine-tune the amount of clarinet sound that's entering my chain of effects. So much like a gas pedal, if I were to let off on this completely, this is choking everything off. This is not allowing any clarinet sound to pass through, and the result is then just purely acoustic clarinet. But the more I start to press on the gas, the more it allows that sound to pass through and be affected, which is great because this allows me a lot of flexibility in terms of fine-tuning and adjusting the balance of the electric side of the overall sound versus the natural acoustic side coming from the clarinet. This is used quite a bit in demo throughout, in order to fade in and out of whatever effects I have engaged throughout the piece. So next in our signal chain is going to be an octave pedal. In this case, I typically like to use the Boss OC3. And this is going to add a lot of depth to the effects that we continue to stack on from here, because this is going to not only add the octave below the clarinet sound, but it's also going to add just a little bit of the second octave below as well. And when this is followed immediately by a fuzz distortion effect, such as Warm Audio's Foxy Tone Box, this is going to result in a really deep, dark, crunchy, almost heavily synthesized sort of bass clarinet-y sound that proves to be central to the overall tone of demo. Now, after our octave and fuzz distortion effects is one that is more of an optional effect for performing demo, but one that I like to include nonetheless whenever I'm playing it, and that is a modulation effect, and more specifically, a flanger, Walrus Audio's Polychrome. Modulation is essentially a larger family of effects, flanger, chorus, vibrato, tremolo, that all essentially involve adding subtle time and pitch fluctuations to the sound signal to add texture. So in demo, this is used in a few different solo lines throughout the work, so that once I establish an octave distortion bass line underneath, I kick on the flanger to allow that solo line to not only have texture, but also to allow it to pop a little bit better above that bass line. Now, after our modulation effect is going to be perhaps one of the more core effects to performing demo, and that is digital delay, aka an echo effect. So for those that are unfamiliar with the full functionality of the Joyo DC delay, I highly recommend you actually check out the previous video in this series, which provides a really great in-depth dive to the main functionality of this pedal, because there's a lot going on with it. The delay effect in demo is used in two different ways, and one of which is rather unique, so that if I were to take the feedback knob, or the number of repeats in my echo, and if I were to max that out completely and just hold a note, what's going to happen is that it's going to keep echoing that note almost indefinitely essentially creating a drone. And what I'll do at that point is I'll back off on the volume pedal and I'm going to play an acoustic solo line on top of that drone. And this is used in a couple of different instances throughout the work. Now, the other type of delay is going to involve me backing off on the feedback knob, but focusing more on the delay time. So in this case, this other type of delay is going to create more of a duet style rhythmic interaction. So my delay time is specifically the dotted eighth note. So I can use the tap tempo function for this. So if I imagine my quarter note pulse, I'll tap out that dotted eighth note, ba, ba. And now whenever I play something, I'm going to expect that to echo back after exactly a dotted eighth note's worth of time in my desired tempo. And as I'm performing demo, I'll switch back and forth between these two different types of delay. Now, after all of this, we have our final core effect for performing demo, and that's going to be looping. Now, a loop station such as the Boss RC3 is going to allow for a lot of flexibility and versatility for a single line instrument such as clarinet. It's going to allow me to record snippets of sound, and once I'm done with that recording, it's going to keep looping that indefinitely or until I tell it to stop. And in some instances, this can allow me to establish a bass line and then solo on top of said bass line. But in other instances, like towards the end of demo, this is going to allow me to establish a bass line, but then keep stacking harmonies on top of that to add depth to the instrumentation to finish off the whole work. So now that we've gone through our whole chain of effects, here's a visual summarizing our entire signal path, all the way from the pickup through to the amplifier. So once our sound leaves the clarinet, it's hit with the volume pedal, followed swiftly by octave, then fuzz distortion, then modulation / flanger, then delay, and finally looping. And after that, my main piece of advice would really just be getting a lot of practice with the footwork as you're switching in and out of these effects. And that's going to just about do us for this video. I want to thank y'all so much for watching. For performers, for composers that are interested in writing for live effects, I hope you found this video helpful. For those interested in performing the work, I'll leave a link down to the contact portion of my website. Feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to set you up with getting a copy. And be sure to leave a like and subscribe. But thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.